so many beautiful castles and so many beautiful things throughout not just Europe but Africa as well. So that's one of the reasons why they want to associate them with the Muslims and try to, separate them from building amazing castles like the Alhambra Castle in Spain, or, the Saint Maria, the castle or the cathedral that I was at when I was in Spain, when I was in Mallorca. So if you separate them from the Arabs, then you can say, well, the Africans didn't build this, the Arabs built this, but then you will have to go back to history and find something comparable that the Arabs built before, Islam. Find something amazing like the Alhambra Castle that the Arabs built, before that. It was the Moors who built this stuff. It was the Moors who had the knowledge, and the Moors basically, joined with Islam, with the Muslims, to conquer. Now, also, as I talk about in the Moors DVD, you had Procropius, who basically was a Byzantine scholar back in the 6th century AD, who talked about the Moors in his book, A History of War. On A History of War, Volume 4, page 323, he says, "But desert land existing to a great distance, and that beyond that there are men, not black-skinned like the Moors, not black-skinned like the Moors, but very white in body and fair-haired." So again, it's so obvious. You're going to find references like this and others pertaining to the Moors and them being black. And mind you, we're talking about 500 AD, the 6th century AD. This is before Islam. So again, you have a reference to the Moors being black before Islam. So we can basically kill that, with that kind of understanding. But you have a lot of people who don't do the research, who don't look deeply into the history of their countries. I try not to argue with, Arabs who was born in like Iraq, and it's like a lot of Arabs who was born in these countries who really defend Islam because that's what they know. They was born in something where the entire environment was conducive to Islam. So to them, Islam is just 100% real. Everything about it is the truth. It's the same thing with the Syrians. A lot of them are Christians, Orthodox Christians. Catholics too, as well. Same. A lot of these people who grew up in these European countries or in these Middle Eastern countries, who was born into atmosphere of religion, deeply have a religious faith because everything they did was surrounded by the religion. Here in America, over in America, it's not so. You can say you're Christian, you can say you're Muslim or what have you, but it's no way you can be a true religious person in America because the environment is not conducive to any religion. Even the people who go to church break their religion in church, and as soon as they step foot out of church or mosque or what have you, nobody is true to the faith in any religion. So it's tough to get a person who was born in an environment like that to understand about their true history, where they come from, and the fact that their religion is not true. So I get this in a lot of cases, the same with people who was born in countries that was colonized, and they don't want to admit, or they don't want to have the understanding that before, your people ever set foot there, there was African people there, and basically the place was colonized. So when I was talking about in the last video that I put out on YouTube about traveling and black people traveling, this is one of the reasons why. And this is one of the reasons why I put out videos to try to get people to, do the research and have the understanding about history and the history of a lot of countries around the world, and how the Europeans and the powers that be they are actively trying to steal your history, steal, your claim, your birthright, where your people came from. So when you understand this and how it's this faulty history that's being implanted in so many different countries, and the natives, the people who are there now are believing in it, and they're growing up and teaching their kids and so on and so forth. And sooner or later, the true history is going to be gone. And a lot of people are not going to know it or have an understanding of, what happened. So as for the guy who I just read from, who actually believed black people never set foot in Northern Africa prior to slavery, that is ridiculous. That's just like something stupid, for somebody to say out of anger. And it's a lot of messages you see like that with people. Some people just love being ignorant. Some people are just so racist they don't care about the truth. But it's important for us to have that truth and to know it and to put people in check and put them in their place when they say stuff like that. So people like George Lopez and others, you'll hear that phrase used a lot, Sub Saharan African. You can understand now what they're trying to do. They're trying to familiarize people with that term, Sub Saharan African, so they can use it to separate us, to separate Africans from Northern Africa and everything that's there. So again, of course, there were Africans in Northern Africa. One, we can already trace the fact that the Egyptians, before they went to Egypt and Nubia, that they came, they was in Kemet, they was in Nubia, they were in Ethiopia and Kenya, and we can follow them up the Nile to Kemet, and everything that they left, artifacts or what have you, proven that they came from Sub-Saharan Africa up to the north. So this is already proven. Even the migration pattern shows that Africans went through Morocco, crossed the Straits of Gibraltar into the Iberian Peninsula, which is lower Spain, South Spain. So, Portugal and Spain, the Iberian Peninsula would be a mountainous region of between those. But we can prove this already. Artifacts have been found. I discussed all this in the Moore's DVD. But we know, people like Azra Kwesi, Dr. Ben, they dedicated their life, a lot of time, years, into putting out this research that, a lot of Europeans have not seen. A lot of people, when they talk about Azra Kwesi, and I get this a lot from a lot of Europeans, a lot of white people always say, oh, he's Afrocentric. I get called Afrocentric a lot. Fuck Afrocentric, it's bullshit. I'm not trying to hear that. Truth. And that's what it's about. You can call it whatever you want to call it. It's truth. We're not trying to promote our race over another race. We're putting out the truth. And the fact is, we was here first. We had the knowledge first. It was stolen from us. It's just the truth we're trying to point out and get people to understand, get our people to understand our real history, because it has been stolen and taken from us. And anybody who can't understand that don't want to understand that. So you get a lot of people, Europeans, a lot of white people who get offended when you start talking about African history. They get offended when you start talking about black history. They feel some type of way. And this you get attacked almost immediately by somebody when you start bringing up African history, because there's a guilt. And they know deep down inside, one, they can't claim these countries because we was there first. Colonization is still taking place to this day. As I pointed out before, what the hell is Ethiopia doing with a president? What is it doing with a constitution? What's going on? Why are these African countries developing presidents and constitutions? And you got to understand what's taking place. It's still colonization. You have Africans still selling out to these Europeans and, trading their own people and, their lives for money, enslaving them and under these systems. A constitution is bullshit. There's no need for a president when you have a king. And, they've been doing the same thing for hundreds of years. And it's important for people to understand it and recognize that. But again, when we're talking about Europe, we put a lot of emphasis in Kemet, as I said, into Africa. But when talking about Europe, we have to understand and get people to understand that, yeah, we were in Europe first, and we're talking about as recently as the 14th century, and we can prove that. So, it's stuff that a lot of people need to understand in looking at history. So what has already happened to Europe, they're trying to do with Africa, and that's as far as people believing that Europe was always white, that European, we even give them that name, European, basically giving them, the countries, and that's a name that they came up with. It's not our name. So the very race or the very title that they give themselves is pertaining to the land itself. And I asked this question to a Christian. I said, do you think it's weird that we call God the same thing that European men called each other, and that's lords? The Lord. They called each other lords. Why are we calling God the Lord when European men call each other lords? What is that? So again, this just goes back to them having that name pertaining to something great, and we using that name. We call God the Lord, and they called each other Lord. So again, it's them instilling that impression that Europeans or gods and Europeans control certain parts of the country or certain countries, certain territories. But we got to understand that this stuff has been controlled by African people for thousands of years, long before Europeans came into power and they conquered their way onto the throne, and that's basically the case. So as I always say, rulership of a country, we're talking about a war had to be fought, and a winner had to be determined. But when you go back and examine the history and what took place, that's not basically what took place. There's a lot of deception involving the Europeans' rise to power, and there's a lot of backstabbing on Africans' part. Believe it or not, the Moors, they need to blame, as I point out in the DVD. And we got to understand that, history is not what we think it is, and history is written by the conquerors, not the conquered. And a lot of the stuff that we think is true is simply not. It's bogus. Anytime a person is trying to make a claim of any country before African people, is bullshit. So we got to go back and look at the fact that Spain was shared in the 3rd century BCE, was shared with Romans and Africans. Libya, same thing. Libya was shared with Africans and Romans. There's a lot of countries that, we had Africans sharing it with Europeans or with white people for a long time before, this whole conquest started to happen. Again, the ancient Egyptians talk about white people being in Kemet as citizens. So we got to understand Libya is right next door. And there were, in fact, Romans in Libya during that time. And, they was coming into Kemet and learning and getting information. It has never been a time in history that we could point to where African people turned on white people and tried to conquer any land or any place that they set foot in. So you got to understand that. What we've seen as far as conquest is the agenda of a higher power, a higher group of people who commanded armies, who had control of these armies, and who had an agenda, and they basically executed that agenda by infiltrating into African countries, getting in positions of power, marrying onto the throne, and at one point they just executed their plan and removed Africans from power. This is what the Dark Ages was about, as we got into in the DVD. The Dark Ages was basically about not the fall of Rome, as if you Google it, you'll see it say it's the fall of Rome. It's not the fall of Rome. It is the fall of African rulership and the rise of Rome. So the rise of European rulership, I should say. So again, you have to really pay attention to history. Again, there's a lot of stuff that's hidden, but not everything. And the problem is, you had so many Europeans themselves that wrote about history, that wrote about real history and the truth. And the books are out there, and a lot of people don't have access to them or even know what to look for. But the proof is out there. I mean, even in some museums that you go to, you can find proof. You can find artifacts. The indigenous people is still there in a lot of cases. People think there's no black people in Kemet, in Egypt now. It still is black Egyptians there. It still is black people in Morocco and Algeria, what have you. But we're not shown that. Now, as far as Berbers or Beavers, whatever you want to call them, Berbers basically was what the Muslims call mixed. Africans and Arabs or Europeans or what have you. It was when it was mixed. If you actually Google Berber and look at the pictures of the people, you'll see different skin complexions throughout. But, it's important to note that, one, before all this colonization, the land was basically controlled and ruled by African people. So when we use that term, racism, white supremacy, this is what we point to. And it's ignorance as well. But you have to understand, one, you have so many scientists around the world and consensus on the fact that Africans was here first. No matter what situation you go through, you cannot get Europeans without African people. They were not here before us, and you got to understand that we had civilizations already set up long before Europeans ever stepped foot on the scene. Asians as well, who were before Europeans. So you got to understand, with so much thousands of years that have been covered up, destroyed. We already got proof of the destruction of African civilizations at the hands of Europeans, and so many artifacts and things they destroyed. It was the same thing that happened in the 15th century when the Romans got back into Spain. They destroyed everything pertaining to the Arabs or the Moors, and the only thing they kept was the Alhambra Castle. Everything else was destroyed, and so many other artifacts and structures that Africans built was destroyed and wiped out to cover up the fact that they belonged to African people. So we've seen this before. And again, people got to understand the things that they're trying to do to steal the accomplishments of African people. And by us understanding and knowing the truth and putting it out there, we can, we can stop that from happening. So I wanted to make this quick video to get you guys to understand that, yeah, they've been trying to steal North Africa. It's nothing new. They're trying to steal Kemet. It's nothing new. But we have to understand our position all over the world. That, so many countries that we have been there and set up civilizations long before anybody. And it's not a matter of saying, we're better than you, we're smarter than you, or what have you. It's the truth. It's the facts that we was here first and we did something great and unbelievable that was stolen and is now being passed off as European accomplishments when it belonged to African people. And that's crazy. And we have a right to stand up and say, hey, no, that came from us. That was ours. If you gave us credit for it, it would be a different story, but we're not even giving credit for it. We are being looked at as stupid, primitive people who had no knowledge, no schools, no wealth, nothing before European domination. So it's our duty. It is up to us to educate our children and ourselves and each other as to the real history, because they're not going to do it. They're not going to change the history books. So yeah, I wanted to put this out. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch. Thanks to everybody who took the time to purchase. The Moors DVD is out now. It's available. And follow me at The Real Merkabah, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And I'll see you guys next video.